you could have like a really dark scene, and then suddenly like lightning hits, and that lightning looks more real instead of looking so flat, if you like, as if you were in 100 nits, because you have more space to work with it.
Thanks for coming on here, man. I know there's a lot of people that would love to see how you, I guess, you formulate, and we'll talk about it in the podcast, but how you come up with your color palettes, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and just briefly talk about where you're from and where you're at now.
Okay, well, I'm a colorist. I was an editor before, but then I transitioned to colorist. I come from Peru. I've been working in the industry for like 15 plus years as an editor and the colorist. Well, I fell in love with color way back when Final Cut 7 was out, and they released Apple Color. That's where I first discovered color grading. I took a course on DaVinci Resolve 8 way back in the day. I think it was 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And I've been doing it ever since. And now I moved to LA 2 years ago, and I'm working on more stuff here. It's a bigger industry. It's a much nicer place, I think, as well. And yeah, I'm pretty
Uh-huh.
happy, stoked.
So you're working kind
That's
of back
great.
and forth between Los Angeles projects, and then do you work still with any particular production companies back in Peru?
Yeah, yeah, I do advertising for Peru, and I'm doing a couple of features as well with some Peruvian clients. I'm doing one, I think, at the end of July. It's a big movie with lots of VFX. I mean, it's like 89% VFX mixed with the AI stuff. It's about this like moto taxi, like racing sort of thing.
How is it different, you know, the productions in Peru versus the productions here from a post production perspective? What are the big differences?
I mean, it's more than the process. It's the industry. I think this is a much larger industry. There's so much work here. Or well, there's a bit more work because when I moved here, the strike hit and there was no work. But I think that the industry here being bigger, there's more opportunities. It's a very small industry in Peru. They're very talented, but there's like you have to be lucky and you have to know people to to thrive. I think otherwise it's a bit of a hard one. I feel there's more in post production. There's like bigger studios here in Lima. There's the post production studios are not that big. Production is pretty big. They got all the gear. They got all the cameras. They're using Alexa 35 a lot. They're using the Alexa Mini as well. I mean, they got great cameras. They got great talent. Uh, there's a bit of an issue now with the film industry. They want to take away some of the rights for the actors. So there's a whole thing going on now in Peru with cinema. But advertising is always big. They're always going to Cannes Lion to see to get prizes and stuff like that.
You color narrative, projects, commercials, documentaries, but let's talk first about kind of your process, just briefly, about like working with me as a director. Like, do you obviously, like with Paper Flowers is our first project we wanted to talk about? I'd love to know what your process is when you come into a particular film. Do you work with the director of like the color palettes and the color scheme, the tone, the textures in the beginning, or is that a lot on the back end? Because I like to work personally as a director with not only my DP, which would be Jacob, a lot, but also the colorist before we go into production, talk about themes and color palettes. How's your process work? And can you tell us a little bit about how you did it with Paper Flowers?
Yeah, well, the first thing I do is once I get the project, I start doing groups. First I conform it. I get everything set up. Everything's the right size because sometimes when it comes from Premiere or other NLEs, things get shifted a little bit. So I make sure that everything's exactly the same as the online regarding sizes and timing and everything. Then I start grouping my sequences in Resolve. So if I want to give a sequence a specific look or mood, I can do it on the whole group. Once I have everything set up, I usually I either sit down with a client, and I do some previous work on the look. I have a couple of looks that I feel that would go good with a specific film, or sometimes specific sequences. Just have a couple of shots ready for them to see, or I sometimes send it over for them to check out and maybe give them like 2-3 options, and we start working from that. No, once we agree on a specific look, I uh, grade a whole sequence or 2 or 3 sequences, and then I send that over to see how it feels when it plays through. Then I get notes on that, and we start polishing that, and then I start going through the whole thing, because sometimes when I started, I used to go through the whole thing, and then I had lots of notes, and it was much more work. So it's a very collaborative workflow, I think.
We were talking about paper flowers.
Mm-hmm.
That's it?
Yeah. It's like chicken.
They forgot the "ken" part of the chicken.
Okay.
That's Fiona, the love of my life. I somehow conned her into being my girlfriend junior year of high school.
I love you.
I love you more.
And here we are 6 years later, about to graduate college and head off to the Peace Corps. That's Millen, my best friend.
You just became every Indian parent's worst nightmare. Mom, Dad, I'm not going to med school. Instead, I'm going to go to a third world country and volunteer.
And Mom and Dad.
Opens up in a way where we almost have a different aspect ratio shift during the intro. It almost goes from a 4:3 to a widescreen in the trailer. Can you talk a little bit about those types of things? Because obviously the color palette looks great. It looks accurate for geography. The skin tones look wonderful. But do you have any input on those types of technical things, like seeing that aspect ratio change? Is that a decision that you're helping bring to fruition, or is that decided beforehand?
No, that's decided beforehand. I got that. I had to mimic that in the best way possible, because I was using a LUT, and they had like a mask that was being affected by that LUT. So I had to crop the image and try to make it the same. Well, I made it the same, so it looks the same. But yeah, that was a decision made from the offline, from the editor.
So that's very interesting you mentioned that, because it was a decision that obviously the director and the editor probably came up with. And then when it goes to you and it's your turn, you're kind of having to see what they wanted to do, but also refine it to make it technically viable as a grade, right? So like you said, you had to kind of mask and adjust it, because from their end, I guess, what was it about the blanking fill, like, or the matte on either side? You said the LUT was conflicting with it.
Yeah, because I was using a color managed timeline, it was grabbing the blacks and lifting them a little bit, because I was using a filmic LUT for that specific project. And I think there's also a shift in the grade, if I'm not mistaken, because I did this a while ago, but I think I also transitioned from like more grainy or a bit less saturated to a more saturated as it shifts. So I had a note there that I tweaked the opacity from 100 to 0 when that transition happened as well, which helped the change. And yeah, that's basically.
Directors are always throwing difficult stuff at you, huh? That make life difficult.
Sometimes you got to kind of audition it and feel it out and let some organicness happen to it, and it kind of.
That's right.
I like challenges. It keeps it fun.
So, Gino, let's talk a little bit. We go from narrative to documentary. Can you kind of tell people, like, what's your process from obviously a narrative film to now a documentary? Can you talk a little bit about your project?
He said, "This is the bank of the people."
He took capital that had been held in the hands of a privileged few and put it into the hands of all of these people.
Giannini kicked the top hat off of banking. Giannini met resistance by the banking establishment.
The New York J.P. Morgan structure stood in his way.
For documentary, what I usually do is instead of, because it's shot with different cameras, sometimes we get different sources. We have archive, we have things shot with maybe 1 or 2 or 3 cameras, depending on how long that documentary has been shot. Like there's some documentaries that have been shot in like 5 years and they've changed the cameras several times. So I use for that, instead of like in film or in narrative, I use like probably I would work, if you've shot in ARRI, I would work in an ARRI color space. And if there's anything else like drones and things like that, I will convert it to that color space. For documentary, I don't use a camera color space from my timeline. I use DaVinci White Gamut or probably ACES, depending on where this is going. If it's going for Netflix, they usually ask for ACES. If it's going for anywhere else, I usually go for DaVinci White Gamut because I like how it manages the shadows and the roll-offs that it has. So I set my timeline to DaVinci White Gamut, and then I start converting all the camera color spaces to that specific color space. And then on the way out, it goes from DaVinci White Gamut to Rec 709 or PQ, whatever the end deliverables are set to. What I do is I don't group by scenes sometimes, because it's more like I group by cameras, because I'm not working on the DaVinci color management. I work on node color management. So I do it by nodes with color space transforms and things like that, which gives me more control over some of the archive footage, especially.
You mentioned archive footage. So in this particular documentary, there's a lot of that I noticed. There's a lot of, cutting to these black and white 4x3 images and, or these films, I guess. How do you approach that as a colorist? Are you looking at these black and white images and thinking, okay, I can't really do much for color, but what can I do for clarity? What can I do for, tone or feel, or, what are you thinking when you see that black and white footage? What are your techniques there, and what is your approach?
You're referring to the little fellow, right? The documentary?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for that we have lots of like very beautiful archive, and some of that archive is a bit like, it's not the best quality, because like some of the black and white stuff is a bit like low quality, and so I try to give it some grain on top just to try and hide those imperfections and make it more film-like. But I don't do much with that really, because it's already what it is, sometimes when you get newer shots and you want to make it look like those, that's where it gets harder. But I didn't do much of that. For the photos, for example, for all the stills, I put a bit of grain on them so that they have that same sort of filmic feel. And usually for the archive, you just have to try and make it look the best possible way. There's some of it, there's not much you can do, but as I said, the grain really helps to blend in all the images together if you use a specific grain for them.
So I have a question, Gino. So some people always ask me this question, so I think it might be appropriate. What would you say on, because you did work in the editing side, but now, primarily as a colorist, but if someone was delivering a documentary, a film to Netflix, Hulu, what are the deliverable aspects that those companies want?
For Netflix, they specifically asked us to work in ACES, for example. So they have a future proof of all the film. So they asked us to use ACES. They asked us to use the color management pipeline from DaVinci for ACES. And yeah, everything's converted to the ACES color space, to AP0. It's worked in AP1 and then back to AP0 and to delivery specs. So once you finish grading, they ask for IMFs, and the IMFs contain, it's a package that contains all the audio channels, all the audio tracks, sorry. It contains the video track, it contains like an XML that puts them all together, And the good thing about that is that if there's any tweaks that they ask for along the way or after you've delivered the IMF, you could just do patches for it that relate to that. I mean, they link to that the master you sent them the first time, so you don't have to export the whole thing again. You just export the patches. You put the patches on top of the original IMF, and then you export that, and then they get a smaller file with only the patches, which helps speed up the process. Otherwise, it's exporting the whole thing again, and it's not the best solution. But yeah, and then they ask for a master that's in AP0, so that they can, if there's a better format than HDR in the future, or a broader color space than P3, like if Rec 2020 gets more popular or there's a broader color space, they can grab the AP0 and then turn it into whatever in the future. It just future proofs the production.
So I guess we'll just go ahead and talk about our project.
They say some towns are hidden gems, but Ocean Springs, it's the whole treasure chest. Colorful streets, coastal eats, music in the air, and art on every corner. Sail, sip, shop, or just stroll. Here, the good life comes easy. So go ahead, wander a little, discover Ocean Springs.
When we kind of started collaborating, obviously Jacob and I in our prep, we talked about shots, what a golden look, and then Gino, we talked about in a different department, different time. We talked about kind of how that color palette should play out with a golden look, skin tones look a certain way, and I know Jacob can identify this. I feel the hardest thing to match, like on a Mavic Pro 3 or something, is like a Sony cinema camera look. But then it's like, do you do a sky replacement? Do you do a lot of rotoscoping when it comes to matching, a certain look as a cinema camera look, as opposed to like someone like us when we flew the Mavic Pro?
I used the DaVinci Film Look Creator for it, so that will put us on the same ballpark with the colors. I also think that converting things from camera color space either to a standardized color space to work on, like DaVinci White Gamut or ACES, also puts you in the same more or less ballpark with everything. And then it's just adjusting the temperature of different things. I mean, it will never look the same because it has a different sensor for sure, but you could get it more or less in the same place. What I'm doing more now with commercials as well, because there's sometimes they're going to, for example, YouTube and stuff like that. I'm trying to push HDR on commercials so that they look more poppy. If I'm using ACES, I could just shift the output to HDR and just do some tweaks. I could what I'm doing with most of the commercials I've been doing, because they're delivered in Rec 709. I have a node transformation that will transform the 709 output color space to HLG Rec 2020, which will play back awesome on, for example, Instagram or YouTube. Now YouTube even allows for Dolby Vision now, so that's awesome. And I think HDR is starting to become more mainstream. I mean, we're seeing it all the time. Our phones, for example, the iPhone records in HLG Rec 2020. So I mean, that's everything you're shooting with the iPhone and then you're posting on Instagram. If you're recording it in 60 frames per second, for example, and you upload a story, that's HDR. So just that when you're flicking through stories and you see suddenly these bright shots come up, that's HDR. So what I'm trying to do is make things pop a bit more. For example, for my stories, what I do is, or my reels, anything I've done in SDR and I haven't been asked to do in HDR, I tweak it and make it HDR so that when people look at my work, it looks a bit brighter, it looks a bit more eye-catching. I think it looks more real because at the end of the day, when you're looking at a bright light in your dark room, for example, the bright light really, like, I mean, it stings your eye, you know. It's like really, like, you can't look at it straight. With SDR and what we're used to watching, it only gets to 100 nits. I mean, no TVs now will display you 100 nits. Okay, so what's happening, for example, when you watch an SDR show on a TV, those 100 nits gets expanded all the way to probably 300 nits or something like that, or probably 600 nits, 300, something like that. What HDR gives you, it's, well, you can go from 0 to 1,000 nits, which is the standard HDR. You could go to 2,000 to 4,000. So it gives you a wider range to play with light. I mean, you don't have to hit 1,000 nits because 1,000 nits is a lot, really, and it's not necessary. What happened before, when they started working in HDR, they were asked, I mean, colorists were asked to hit those limits. But now I think it's better managed, that not many people go past 600 nits for some of the highlights, which makes it nicer. I've seen a couple of shows that were done like years ago, where if you see that lights, like a light bulb on the scene, it was 1,000 nits, no? But it's less and less of that now, I think. So it's been managed better. That's why you don't feel it so like artificial. But yeah, I mean, I think it's big. I mean, like, it's measured from 0 to 10,000 nits HDR. We haven't reached 10,000 nits yet on any display by any means now. I mean, there's some 4,000 nit displays like the Sony HX3 110 that reaches 4,000 nits. It's a very expensive monitor, but it's great for mastering because you have that really wide like light space from 0 to 4,000. Usually what we're looking at on displays like the LG C3s or C4s or G3s, G4s, you're almost at 1,000 nits. On the latest versions, usually it goes up to 600 or 800 nits. So the advantage, I think, is that you have more space in the shadows to play with darkness too. It's not all about the brightness, but you have a lot more space to play with the shadows, so you can have a darker version without losing detail, so you don't have to crush the black so much. You could have like a really dark scene and then suddenly like lightning hits, and that lightning looks more real instead of looking so flat, as if you were in 100 nits, because you have more space to work with it. So your image, for example, is only reaching like, I don't know, like 200 nits because it's all dark, and there's a couple of lights here and there, like, for example, street lights. And then when the thunder hits, you could make that thunder reach like 800 nits, and it's like, it looks more real. I feel it looks more like the real world.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're saving certain elements or certain data, like you said, exposed bulbs, lightning flashes, the sun, any really bright source. You're kind of reserving that for almost a bracket or a section of that dynamic range, so that when it's there, the audience really feels it. It seems like there's more contrast, and by contrast, I mean just for the definition, the difference between the highlights and the shadows, right?
I mean, that's what the iPhone is doing, for example. It's grabbing all that range, and when you're shooting with the iPhone, it's expanding it to all that range. That's why when you look at Instagram stories and you're flicking from an SDR or Rec 709 content to an HDR content, you could really feel it pop. I mean, your phone just goes, I don't know if you've seen that, no? But that's not graded, that's just out of the phone. when you grade something, you can control those highlights so that they don't reach the 1,000 nits and it doesn't look so like just stretched. You could like work with your shadows. And I mean, now that I tell you this, when you're in a dark room, and for example, now I'm here, I got my lights here, I can see the darkness and I can see detail in the darkness, even though it's really dark. And I have this like very strong light hitting me from front, which is like, I don't know how many nits it is, but like it's you can't really get this sort of thing in SDR. I think it's like HDR is more of a simulation of what the human eye perceives in the real world, as SDR is a limited range of that.
On our commercial, you got a chance to do some like of a tutorial, right?
Yeah. I use a fixed node structure because it helps me be faster. I believe I'm not having to create new nodes all the time. I have like nodes made for specific things. So I'll show you. I choose all my clips, Command A, and I have a gallery where I have all the nodes here. So I like to use a node structure that my friend Walter Volpato made for me, and he uses a similar one. So I right click on it, I middle click on it, and it's ready to roll basically. So I have my balance, my noise reduction. I have some specific per character nodes here. Then I have all of these like free nodes to do whatever I need to. Then I got like skies, like the ocean or maybe grass, log, which I use for some like using the log wheels or maybe using the HDR wheels. I have the curves, beauty, which I use to make beauty work on the face or something like that. Then I got my magic mask, which is right here, so that I don't it won't ask me to retrack if I do any changes, so it feeds straight from the source. And then I got my OFX. So I work on my secondaries here. Then I start working like past the secondaries, just doing any adjustments, OFX, vignettes. And these are my client notes or client corrections, so that if the client wants to see what I did before and after, I can just click on and off and we're good. So that's been copied all along, okay? And I start with my base grade. I go one after the other one, go do the base, do the base, do the base. And once I do it all, I'm ready to start working like on effects and stuff like that. What I also like to do, which I forgot before doing the base grade, if I'm gonna use a LUT, a lookup table, just to give it a look from the get-go, I like to group. In this case, I got groups here, and then we got look number 1. So I assign that to the group. It's giving it a specific look. I do that with all of them. And as you can see now, I got my group nodes here where I have my film box, which gives me the halation and grain that I want. And then I have a film look creator where I set my look. So now that you know more or less what my initial workflow is, I'm going to jump right through to the actual grades for this commercial we did. So I'm going to go to this, which is my grade. So this is where we left off on the other one, on the other tab. And I did my balance. I put the lights up. I didn't want to go too far up because I felt that the lights here were a bit too strong, and it's a pretty dark shot from the camera. So then I went here and I did a mask just to boost this middle part here, trying to not to lose any detail. I mean, it lost some of the green, but it's what it is. Then I came here and gave it a little bit of a glowiness with this aperture diffraction effects that I have here, OFX. Then these are notes that I was given. by Nathan. So what I did here is I boosted up the shadows a little bit. If you can see, I'll bring up you can see here what I've done exactly. So I'll show you. See, I boosted the black levels. I left those so the shadows I lifted them. I left the highlights as is because I didn't want to go further than this. It was already good. I mean, I didn't want to go past that because I was going to lose more information, but I think this turned out nice. I did the same for this. This was pretty dark. I didn't want to lose the windows or the left and the right or make it too flat, so I made the most of this wall here and I boosted this part. Then that's it for that one. I gave it that aperture diffraction that I gave to the other one as well, and I started doing that for all of them.
Thank you for all the insight, Gino. I loved hearing all this technical knowledge you have. We'll have to bring you back and do some training.
It was great. It was great to talk to you guys. I mean, thanks for having me.
We appreciate you checking out the podcast today. And if you want to see more of these, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell notification, and you'll be notified, obviously, when we release more of these. If you're on the go, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and iHeartRadio podcast is on all 4 of those as well. We appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.